blood flowing. It helps the ideas work. What Carlton's doing right there, reach up to the sky, reach up, and then as you're able, just reach down and let it all sag out. Maybe shake your shoulders a little bit, and then reach back up. And like a tree, reach up and really feel sunshine on your fingers and wiggle them around a little bit and come back. This is a little thing. We're going to go right hand, right foot, left foot, and count it off from 5, all right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, there we go. All right. Some blood flow. Everyone had a chance to stand up and move around a little bit. Please take care of yourselves. Grab drinks. I am honored and delighted to be here in Vicksburg. I feel like I have drunk about 1.5 gallons of sweet tea in the less than 24 hours I've been in Mississippi, so I think I'm doing it right being here. As Chuck mentioned, I am the Associate Director at Springboard for the Arts, and we are a national artist-led organization based in Minnesota. We have an office in St. Paul, the capital city, and an office in Fergus Falls, which is a town of about 13,000 people out on the western edge of the prairie. So we do our work in urban and in rural contexts. I feel like I need to make this caveat before I speak to any rural audiences or audiences that predominantly work with small towns. I'm a city kid. I grew up in cities. I grew up overseas. My parents are both Lutheran pastors. I lived in Cairo, a city of 19 million people, for a long time. Moved to Minnesota. I lived in Los Angeles. But my family are all Swedish Lutherans all the way down the line. And those that weren't pastors or teachers, they were farmers. My family is from Wahoo, Nebraska, and Stanchfield, Minnesota, and that is where they are buried, and I go back to visit them there. So I love being able to work as an artist and with artists in all the different contexts, and I know that artists have the capacity to make transformative change in the places where they are. And that's really the premise under which Springboard for the Arts is based. We're a 25-year-old national nonprofit. When we were founded, our name was Resources and Counseling for the Arts, and that remains a big thread of the work that we do. We talk with artists, we work with artists around professional development, around business development, and then around things like legal resources for artists, providing healthcare and healthcare access for artists, as well as work on creative issues like partnerships and incubation of small artist-led programs. We support 230 artist-led projects across the state of Minnesota in our incubator fiscal sponsorship program so that they can make work across the state. About a decade ago, we also realized that not only do artists need a lot of support to make a living and a life, but the communities around them really influence how artists make a living and a life. And so we started working in partnership with some of our local neighborhood organizations in the Twin Cities to integrate artists and arts into their programming. And that's really the seed of some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today is projects that we've worked on or provided technical assistance for or helped facilitate. And basically I'm going to be showing you the counterpoint to Zach's projects. We're going to talk not about $8 million or $24 million space developments. We're going to be talking about things that you can do on the ground with the artists who live, work, or have other connections to your neighborhoods. Things that you can do for small amounts of money that helps you share the story of your place and why your place matters, what makes it unique, so that when you do get around to doing a $24 million capital campaign on a new space and building, you have artists who are engaged in the community who knows how valuable those artists are, and a way to communicate that story profoundly and deeply to other people coming into your town. We are a non-judgmental organization when it comes to what art is. It's one of our guiding principles that it is not our job to tell you if your art is good or not. We are here to help you make the most of the art that you make. So we borrow a definition from Alan Capra around what art is. Art is a weaving of meaning-making activity with any or all parts of our lives. And I feel like that really speaks to what creative placemaking does and attempts to engage with folks and attempts to engage the multitude of systems in which artists and creativity is present. So whether that is food and agriculture, whether that is making art objects or social relationships, be bringing people together through music, through quilting, through songs that are happening in the church, across all of these different systems. Creativity, what we produce, is a part of that, and Springboard works within and across those disciplines and practices. That also affects the way that we think about creative placemaking, and I appreciate that Chuck brought up the NEA's definition of creative placemaking earlier on. I think that this is the way that we talk about it. It's very similar. Creative placemaking is the act of people coming together to change overlooked and undervalued public and shared spaces into welcoming places where community gathers, supports one another, and thrives. Places can be animated and enhanced by elements that encourage human interaction, from temporary activities such as performances and chalk poetry to permanent installations such as landscaping and unique art, or permanent fixtures like new buildings, new spaces, things that you are going to build together. So why do we do creative placemaking? And in the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about some of the impacts that we've seen through the various different forms in which we've worked with artists, and give you some examples of what those projects have looked like. I share these projects, and I want to be really clear about this. We're not to be prescriptive, not to tell you that this is the way that you should do the work in your town, but with the artists who we know, who are in the communities, who we live and work with, these are the works that we're able to do together and the partnerships that we're able to have together. Hopefully you can take some inspiration from that and apply them to your own communities, to your own partnerships, to your own relationships. In front of you all, you should have this postcard for Creative Exchange. If you tune out now, if you were all to walk out, take this postcard with you, because Creative Exchange is Springboard's national platform. It's where we're sharing stories about artists who are making impacts in their communities, and then practical toolkits, various toolkits for projects that you can easily replicate and take in your communities. These are things that we've made so that they can be shared. We made a strategic decision 5 years ago that we didn't want to create franchises of Springboard for the arts across the country. We wanted to write down what we know, share those resources, and then get them into people's hands so that you can apply them to your own communities and to adapt them. We've shared over 5,000 toolkits since we launched the Creative Exchange platform 3 years ago, including Work of Art, which is our Business Skills for Artists toolkit. Walks through a curriculum starts with career planning, marketing, promotions, and then ends with business planning for artists. So there are toolkits there to help artists specifically, and then toolkits to help organizations do creative placemaking work, how to put out calls for artists, how to do specific programs like a postcard project or a bike rack program, or how to do creative placemaking more in general through the Irrigate project, which I'll show you some of those examples, and through our recent partnership with the International Downtown Association and the National Endowment for the Arts, which got mentioned on a slide earlier on today as well. So why do we do creative placemaking work? We do creative placemaking work because we know that artists are valuable community members and that artists exist in every community when you take the time to look and value with the work that people do. We know that lifting up the work of artists and doing that work in partnership with local organizations like businesses, nonprofit organizations, and city government, we know that that work can change the narrative and identity of a community. And Malcolm Smith said it really well when, other people telling your story and you have to live with that, you have to find your own ways to tell your own stories in your community. Artists are doing that, whether they're doing that organically by themselves in a vacuum, or whether they're doing that in partnership with some very specific guidelines or looking to solve certain issues. Artists can help create and shape narratives of a community. We do creative placemaking work because we want to build and diversify cross-sector partnerships. This is really important work to us, and nothing happens in a vacuum. All these systems are intertwined, and that intertwining and that strengthening of those relationships is incredibly important. Just for a quick example, we've had a multi-year partnership with a local community clinic in St. Paul where we're based, where we've been able to provide vouchers to get artists into primary care. We started this work before the advent of the Affordable Care Act. We'll continue this work no matter what happens with healthcare in America now. We want to get people into primary care so that they can carry on with the rest of their lives and make their work, because you can't make work if you're not healthy. Through our creative placemaking work, we've been able to deepen that partnership by bringing in mobile artist projects to do community information gathering and community events, so that the clinic can then ask the people using their services about the new things that they want to see happen, or what is actually valuable about the community, the clinic space for them. So the ability to work in one part of somebody's sector and then say, hey, we're going to bring artists in and work in an entirely different way, has deepened that relationship for us. We also want to increase community and economic vitality. I mean, and Bridget Jones just showed right there, what having creative community development can do for the downtowns. We know that this work, when you have people who want to come to a place, they want to spend money in a place, they want to move to a place, they want to stay in a place. I mean, Zach's examples of getting people in, these are really innovative things that can be taken and be transposed to other places. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about Irrigate. Irrigate was a 3-year project along with light rail development in St. Paul. We created a toolkit based off of it. Starting in 2009-2010, we started doing some work with an organization called Friendly Streets Initiative in the Twin Cities, just bringing artists out to this neighborhood organization and helping them get folks more involved in the neighborhood through arts projects. Art Place was just launching right about that point, which Chuck mentioned earlier as a major national funder of creative placemaking work. And at that exact same time, the city of St. Paul was deciding to build a light rail line through the University Avenue, which is the main corridor through the city. This is going to be a multi-year, enormously disruptive project. It was going to take about 4 years to build this thing. The immediate outcry from businesses along the line was that you are going to destroy our business. No one's going to want to come to the city. No one's going to want to come here. We're all going to suffer. Does that sound like a familiar narrative to some people? So we had started doing this community development work with Friendly Streets Initiative and realized that we had an opportunity with Art Place and then through partnerships with Local Initiative Support Corporation and the City of St. Paul to really design some new way to help shift that narrative and to help do different things around the corridor where this construction, where this disruption was happening. So what we did was we designed a program that was going to span the years of the construction to work with artists who lived, worked, or had a significant connection to the line. And this is an important distinction for us, because sometimes when you hear about creative placemaking, you hear about national or international firms coming and designing a plaza and then leaving and the plaza fails and nobody uses it. It's because they didn't ask the people who actually lived there what they actually wanted out of it. They didn't engage the people who lived in that space or used that space about what would make that more interesting to them. So this is a core value of our creative placemaking work, and one that we've attempted to keep throughout the work that we do, is that you can bring in outsiders to do technical assistance. You can bring in folks to help you talk about best practices or design. But when it comes to people doing the work, when it comes to people shaping the work, make those the people who live, work, or have significant connections to the places in which you're doing the work. We designed a program that would last over the course of the 3 years, in which we would invite artists, or people who consider themselves artists, people who maybe thought they were artists but didn't quite know it yet, or people who we just told that they were artists and they should really come down to these workshops, to come to a workshop which was essentially a community organizing workshop. We worked with them on team building skills, on partnership building skills, so that then we could fund programs and projects that they would come up with in partnership with a local business or organization of some kind, and we helped through LISC and the city and our own relationships broker some more of those relationships between artists and businesses. They could do those projects in partnership, and small projects, $1,000 to $3,000 projects along the Green Line to help those businesses or organizations solve specific issues that they were dealing with, or create and animate the spaces in new ways, and really help try and change what was going on along the Green Line construction zone, especially in terms of narrative. These are just a couple different examples of the workshop that we held. And we trained over 600 artists over the course of 3 years. We funded 250 artists to do 150 different projects along the Green Line during the 3 years there. Starting off with the training and then moving into different kind of projects. Here's just a couple examples. A major portion of University Avenue is heavily Hmong, Vietnamese, Lao, new immigrants into America. This is a restaurant called My Village, which was a real neighborhood hub and a community hub for the Hmong and Vietnamese population there. Never had considered having any kind of art in the space. It was simply a community meeting space and a restaurant. Tyler Olson, who's up there in the top hat, he saw it as a performance venue. He saw this space that wasn't being used. He's a theater maker. He makes these raucous, big performance cabaret type events. He saw this as a venue that he could partner with the restaurant to bring people in there. This was not a radical idea to people like myself, who do theater in odd places all the time, but for a traditional business owner, someone who felt that they were running a very specific form of business, this was outside of her comfort zone. So it took some cajoling, it took some talking to. She relented. She said, "Yes, Tyler, finally you can use my space." He started holding cabarets there. Business picked up. Whenever he had an event, people would come down. People would realize that they could come down even in the midst of the construction. They could still find places to park. They could still walk to it. They could still get to it. And business picked up for My Village as Tyler and then Mira Kehoe and her jazz ensemble, as people started doing things in the space. So there's a business owner has a problem that she sees as intractable with nobody coming into the space. Theater artists, music makers see a space that they could use. Some cajoling, you put those two things together, and all of a sudden you have people coming into the space and being entertained and buying food. This is Diana Lane here in the white, right here dancing. She created, she's a theater maker and a teacher and a Zumba instructor. She created what she called the light rail shuffle, which is this dance that she would then intersperse into her Zumba classes that she'd offer along University Avenue. And the thing that you have to know about University Avenue is that it runs right above the I-94 freeway. And like many American cities in the 1950s when freeways were being built, they put 94 right through Rondo, which was the historically black neighborhood. It was the center of African American life in St. Paul. It was a thriving business district. They put a freeway right through it. Those scars haven't healed in the city, and so her light rail shuffle was a way for her to intersperse dance and also really fundamental questions about who is this light rail for? Are we going to be left behind again? And what say do I have in the light rail development? She got to do this dance all through her own organization work, and then at the opening of the Union Depot station and celebrations, she performed this dance and asked those questions of the mayor of St. Paul. And this was happening just after a lot of community organizing efforts to get more stops put along the light rail so that those neighborhoods weren't bypassed in the construction. So those things in tandem helped both surface and have conversations around historical trauma, and also helped shape the way that the physical infrastructure was built in the city. Signage is hugely important. If someone can't find what's going on in your neighborhood, can't get to where you want to go, artists can help with that. These are wayfinding bikes for the St. Anthony Park neighborhood. Artist Carrie Christensen asked people to donate used or old bicycles that they didn't want anymore, had community painting events to indicate where businesses were and to tell people how to get to places, to create a more engaged space around what might have been an otherwise drab, concrete space where the light rail was let off. So it's a great way to have some community buy-in in shaping and telling people how to get to your neighborhood and telling people how to get to where they want to be. This is a great project called The Really Big Table. It is a really big table. It folds up onto a bicycle, and in downtown St. Paul especially, there weren't a lot of places for people to actually sit and have lunch or have conversations. People tend to sit where there are places to sit, and so the Really Big Table gave people a place to sit, whether just generally to have coffee or to have their lunch, but then also as a Trojan horse, bless you, as a Trojan horse for community engagement, as a way to get people to talk about the issues that matter to them in downtown St. Paul. You see right here, there's little pieces of paper and pencils that are left out. We leave question prompts. What do you want to see in the neighborhood? What do you like about the neighborhood? this would be a way to get some community engagement, some community input. So those are just a few examples of the kind of artist projects that came through as part of the Irrigate program. Really different in scope and their nature as to whether they're temporary or permanent, all done in partnership with different parts of the city's business or nonprofit or governmental organization or infrastructure. The wayfinding bikes are still there 5 years on. The Really Big Table has gone on to have a second life as a community engagement tool. It's available for rent in the Twin Cities. Diana Lane is a Springboard regular and uses a resource center and continues to make theater. And Tyler Olson keeps on making different projects, including this one with the Victoria Theater, which is old infrastructure, old theater space. Finding Asian Dance Theater, and filmmaker Nick Clausen worked to activate it a little bit, give people a sense of what else is possible. This helped catalyze a formation of a group that now has site control over Victoria and are working on funds to develop it. Transitioning from that urban context, but keeping that same creative placemaking, artist-led model, this is a couple images from our work in our office in Fergus Falls. The town of Fergus Falls, the major industry of the town used to be this building, which is known as the Kirkbride Building. It's a 1 million square foot mental health hospital that was the state mental health facility up until 2006. You know, in the old model of healthcare, you would essentially ship people off to a place and leave them there. And Fergus Falls was one of those places. And so the town has an enormous connection to community care, to mental health care, as a community of nurses and patients and former patients who are there. And when we opened up our office there in 2011, 5 years after the Kirkbride had closed, the town was really at a loggerheads with what to do about the town, and about the Kirkbride building. There's a faction that wanted to tear it all down. It's too much, can't do anything with it. There's a faction that wanted to keep it in place and really must preserve it as part of the community's identity. One of the first things that we did, and I don't have an image of it here, but we commissioned an artist, Naomi Schliesman, who's now on our staff, to create a chalkboard that was in the shape of the Kirkbride building and just ask the question, what else is possible? We brought that out. We had that in our office. We brought that out to community events. We brought that around. And taking the conversation out of the forum of the city council, where there's money and weights and emotional attachment, and providing people another space to ask that question and to provide answers, really helped shift the way that that conversation took place. And over the past now 6 years that we've been in Fergus Falls, there have been developers that have come and gone, put bids on it, helped have those conversations. But by enabling other forms of conversation around the Kirkbride, including, this is a story circle that then led to the first Kirkbride Arts and History Weekend. There's a really wonderful company called Place-Based Productions, Ashley Hansen and Andrew Gaylord. We had them come in and help facilitate story circles and then create a play about the history of the Kirkbride building. Tangent on that, one of the actors who was in that play was so moved by that history and that history that he learned from that, he then ran for city council and then became a city councilor. I don't know that this is an outcome that you can quantify, how many people through your arts programming then become members of your city council, but you've got an alderman, we've got a city council member. These are ways through the practice of arts and culture that people become more engaged in the governance of their cities, sometimes through formal as well as informal mechanisms. We've now done 3 versions of the Kirkbride Arts and History Weekend. We continue to have these conversations, and what we've seen is that as there have been more forums with which to have conversation around the identity of the town as it relates to mental health, as it relates to people's identity as caregivers, people are then less attached to the physical infrastructure of the building, more willing to have conversations around what else they can do with the building, and yet still retain that identity as a place that gives care to people who are in need. This is a really wonderful project that came from artist Haley Honeman. You can see her right here. We worked with the Five Wings Art Council. Minnesota, like some other states, has different regional arts councils inside of the state. So through the Five Wings Arts Council, we worked with them to do some creative placemaking workshops and then fund up to $7,500 worth of project support for some people to do some work. Haley is a theater maker. She also works in mental and community health issues. She, through the West Central Initiative and through a rural healthcare organization, started telling and sharing stories, collecting stories about rural issues with suicide and depression, and then turning those stories into a play that's now being performed in churches and community centers around the region. And in that way, opening up greater conversation around healthcare throughout the rural area. We also worked with the West Central Initiative to create new ways to welcome people into various towns. This is the Elbow Lake Community Center. Elbow Lake is a small town and is a home to a new Lao population, new immigrants, new Americans. And they are, the lake is a crucial part of their identity in Minnesota, which has 10,000 lakes. That should be no surprise to anybody. Working with them, working with the local artists, decorating their welcome space and their welcome center, finding new ways to have those conversations, and projects in Morris, Minnesota, where we just recently held Rural Arts and Culture Summit, giving people a chance to talk about what their city means, and what their city means to them, share that with city council members, create new projects out of that. These are projects that cost between $4,000 and $5,000, done with artists who are there in the community to do storytelling and share community stories. Like I said, we have made it our business to put ourselves out of business by sharing our model as freely and openly as possible. That's why we write the toolkits, that's why we put them on Creative Exchange, that's why I make them free for anybody to get and to use. About a year and a half ago, we were approached by the International Downtown Association, and we had been at some conferences together. They'd seen us present, we'd seen them present, and we were interested in what our mutual organizations could do for each other. Us as a nationally working, Minnesota-based, artist-led nonprofit organization that makes things happen by the seat of our pants and goes and does things. They, a service organization serving hundreds of downtown associations across North America and the United States and Canada. We worked with them to present creative placemaking workshops at their conferences, and then funded, had an open call for project ideas, and then funded $5,000 projects in various downtown associations. Funded projects in Santa Ana, California, Oklahoma City, Memphis, Chandler, Arizona, New Haven, Connecticut. And the projects all were different in scope, working with the artists who are there. In Oklahoma City, which is where these images are from, they have a problem in that there's not a lot of street level activity, because somewhere in the master planning for Oklahoma City, they built a bunch of tunnels. So all of their downtown is connected underground by tunnels, and so there isn't street level activity. They also have some fairly regular rain in the springtime in Oklahoma City. And so the problem was, we need to get people into the street level, so that they can see what's going on. There's an organization here called Short Order Poems, which does a lot of public poetry events. There is this rain. What do we do with these things? There's also, through the miracle of technology, a new water-resisting paint that they were using then to cut stencils and spray poetry onto the sidewalks. When it was dry, you wouldn't know that anything was there because it's just some clear paint. But as soon as it rains, the water-resistant paint pushes the water away, and these poems appear out of nowhere. And so people would come outside and go up, when it was raining, into the streets to then see poetry just appear right on the street there. In Santa Ana, California, this sycamore tree right here is supposed to be the center of the town and its history. It is where the founder of the town climbed up to survey the land around him and declared that the town would be Santa Ana. through years of mismanagement and poor city planning, it is now a dying tree in the middle of a very picturesque chain link fence parking lot, as you can tell right there. They're looking for ways to animate the tree, to tell people about the history of the town and the development that's happened there. An artist worked with the local downtown association, the local galleries, a mariachi band that performs regularly to create these light and sound installations and bring people out to hear about the history of the town as these performances were happening. This is the first phase of what he hopes will be a larger project called the Kaleo tree, which will have permanent sound and light installations around the tree so people can come and literally play music right by the tree, making this, this historic site also a public and publicly accessible site again. And then in Chandler, Arizona, they're a bedroom community for Phoenix. They have a state highway that runs right through their town, so they have a lot of fast-moving cars coming right through their town. They wanted to draw attention to pedestrians, and so they held an open call for painting pavement and painting sidewalks. This is something that can be done anywhere and helps shape the physical identity and physical landscape of town. You can use it as an opportunity to tell people the story of your town. They got more applications than they had sidewalks to be painted, which then has now generated new ideas of other places they can engage these artists. People want to be engaged in their community, and the process of being open and asking for engagement allowed people to do that in a new way. So they painted these sidewalks in these major intersections on their town. Now where else can we paint things? Who else can we work with? How else can we get people involved in telling the story of our town and making it unique and interesting? These are the core principles that we really work with when we're talking about artist-led creative placemaking. It's defining artists broadly so that you are including as many people as possible in as many ways as possible. Working with local artists, by doing that you ensure that the people who live there have an actual say in shaping what the community looks like and what it wants. Work from existing assets. Infrastructure, old infrastructure is really important and is really useful. There's a Jane Jacobs quote that I really love, which is that new ideas need old buildings. And so if you can put people who might not even realize that there is a box to think outside of that box, give them a building, give them some space, give them some resources with which to do that, you can start a ball rolling that's really generative and that builds new things. Collaborate across sectors. And you don't have to do this all at once. I think that in our work, we often make the mistake of jumping into a major project altogether really quickly and putting all of our eggs in a basket. We talk about our work like we're dating. We want to date, we want to have conversations, we want to be talking to each other for a while before we go in on something that's so big that it'll make or break any of our relationships or organizations before we do this. That gives us some resilience if something does go sideways, to be able to work through it together, gives us better lines of communication, and it helps set expectations. Often artists can feel like they want complete freedom. Organizations that have more structures really want to know what the process is and where we're meeting those things. By having some cross-sector relationships beforehand, we're able to set those expectations more clearly and to give people a better sense of what they're getting into when they're doing this work. That helps if you give people a common cause, if you give people a reason to work together and something bigger that's themselves. And simple mechanisms. We're going to do one painting together, we're going to do one event together, we're going to do it these ways. However you can simplify and make things easiest, do that. Small and many, like I said, over the course of the Irrigate, we trained 600 artists, we funded 250 artists to do 150 different projects. If we're talking about ROI and the different ways that we've been discussing return on investment, think about this. We commissioned a public media research firm throughout the Irrigate program to basically do a listening survey of media, social media, and reports that were coming out around Irrigate and what that narrative looked like. That research firm found that unearned, so media that we hadn't paid for that wasn't advertising, unearned media received 52 million positive impressions over the 3-year run of that program. If you are in city government and thinking about how you are advertising, how you are spending money on marketing your city, think about your investment in artists and the media that they generate for you as a way to get people in there. People want to write stories about exciting and creative things, so give them the stories to write there. build lasting relationships, don't walk away, be relational and not transactional. If people need help with something, give them help with something. If you're in an organization, that can be as simple as giving people a meeting space or access to a photocopier, things like that. Infrastructure that you take for granted, people that you want to work with might not have any access to. So open up your spaces to people and then let them shape you in return. And then pay artists. I know that you all value artists, but value them monetarily. Value them for their cultural input, value them for the way that they shape their community, but know that that doesn't pay their rent and that doesn't put food on their tables. So pay your artists if you're working with them. And these are some questions for you to help with getting started. You know, what are your local assets? Loosely identifying your goals. Who else might be interested? Who else is out there? Who am I not thinking of? And how will you find your artists? These are all questions that we have answers to or resources for in the toolkits that we're sharing on Creative Exchange. And so I'll stop talking now. I'm not Michelle, but that's Michelle's email. She's our rural program director. My email is just carl@springboardforthearts.org. Junli Wong is our artist community organizer who can provide technical assistance on this. I'm also more than willing to talk further about this. I, due to reasons of scheduling and family, can't be here tomorrow, so in the spirit of Mayor Flags, I'm also going to give you my phone number if you want to give me a call at any point. My line is 651-292-3205. Give me a buzz, shoot me an email. 651-292-3205. Yeah, I'm around. I'm always findable. I'm always happy to talk about this. Thank you so much for your time.